In 2026, we productize. We productize. We productize. We productize. We productize. My name is ByLwansta, and I create the things that I wish existed. Let's talk about productization. What do I mean when I say we productize? As a musician, an artist, entrepreneur, to productize is to take your ideas, your identity, your sound, your brand, and turn it into ownable assets, tangible assets. And it's important because in the South African context, financial institutions don't consider IP, intellectual property, as a tangible asset that they can weigh against, how much you're able to loan out. You're not able to use your ideas, not able to use your catalog and the value of it. Just based on the fact that it's not a tangible and ownable asset from their perspective. Now, the idea behind productization is not reactionary. It's not in response to this time we're in South Africa. It's its own revenue stream, right? I've got my revenue streams as a musician pasted in front of me in my office. Services, brand-related revenue, events, product, which I guess would fall under brand-related revenue. I just made a separate one because it requires, you to think a little bit different than just brand-related revenue. Actually, brand-related revenue is just the umbrella. And then there's music, of course, which is your royalties. The one that you often have the most control over is the one that is a direct conversion of your IP into something ownable, something tangible. So like product, right? With music revenue, which is like royalties from radio play, TV play, sync, and the likes. Those are dependent on whether your music is played, right? So the thing about product is that it's about control, it's about ownership, it's about independence, it's about legacy. And I should have prefaced this conversation by saying, before you watch any more of this conversation, if you're not someone who cares about independence, ownership, and legacy, to the left. Okay, no, you can just skip, you can just leave. Because what productization asks of you is to shift your mindset. So I did some research for this particular topic because I've been doing merchandise for as far back as 2008 when I got started with music. I was productizing because a part of me understood the importance of merchandise as an extension of the community that I create with the music. People might connect with the music, and then the product itself, gives a sense of belonging. So I did some research just so I could almost like systemize my thinking, because I've been doing this just to do it because it felt right. 2008, I had these T-shirts that said Team Lwansta. I printed them. I bought T-shirts, like plain T-shirts from Mr. Price, pink, blue, white, black, and I took them to a printing business in Kokstad, where I'm from. I was in Kokstad at the time. I took it to a place called Signwise, and then they printed on these T-shirts for me, but the print was like rubbery, plasticky, and eventually would peel, so it was like a nice trial and error thing that I was doing with them, taking different concepts, taking different designs. So it went from like a heat press situation to, eventually vinyl. But I mean, that's a great segue into our ad. ByLwansta live on vinyl, available now on pre-order. The chip is still unplugged. Get yourself a pre-order. They'll probably arrive in April. There'll only be 20 in the first batch, so get yours now. Proudly brought to you by NORMVL.com. Cool. So, so I used to have this phrase that was, I'm so good.
I'm so good right now.
That I used to say in my music back in between 2008 and 2010, where I was, very much inspired by, like Lil Wayne specifically. He was one of the reasons I got into making music. In fact, he was the reason I got into making music. And he was one of the most iconic, and I say that objectively, like iconic, like you could see a Lil Wayne silhouette. You could hear Lil Wayne through the lighter flicker that would, come before he raps his verse. That giggle he does. But there was just elements to the Lil Wayne brand. He was very brandable, an incredible case study. So when I got inspired by him, immediately I knew, like, why am I doing merch in my first year? Because there's a part of me that understood the importance of, the influence Lil Wayne had on me to go to JJ's in a Gateway Mhlanga and get those really colorful skinny jeans and blah, blah, blah. And just, swag. So I understood to a degree, how to package influence through product. So Team ByLwansta was like a way of, building my community. I sold most of my t-shirts to my classmates at school to, can't even remember how many I moved, but it was always like samples really. But yeah, I understood productization from that fairly, natural, ignorant perspective. So I want to systemize it now because I've been trial and erroring with merchandise for the last 2008 times 2. Wait, 10 years, 16 years. Yeah, I think 16 years. Trial and erroring for the last 16 years when it comes to product. So another thing that, is kind of a tough pill to swallow, particularly if you're a studied musician, someone who's dedicated their life to their craft. Music is not the product anymore. If you remember these guys, right? If you remember an era where these guys were running the music industry, you could walk in and grab one of these, right? Musica, Look and Listen, you could just walk in, find. I mean, that's, how I was consuming music when I was getting into it. My father had a huge collection of CDs that he'd play in the car. Diana Ross, Bill Withers. We came with our T-Pain 3 Rings, 808s and Heartbreaks, AKAs, Alter Ego. Like we got into the culture of buying music very early with my father. And it was the product. An artist could make 100 Rand from just one sale of this. Today, though, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense, but it doesn't make sense, The revenue, stream from streaming makes it not a business. It makes it marketing. It makes streaming platforms into marketplaces, into billboards, right? So to me, that says in my mind, okay, cool. Getting my music up to streaming platforms is not the end goal. Releasing music is not the end goal. Because revenue-wise, if that's all I'm doing, right? If all I do is make music all day and then release it, like there's nothing that grows from there financially in a way that I can control and I can plan my finances around, plan my months around, plan my rental agreements around. You can't do that based on the current streaming model. So to me, that shifts my focus from music being the product because it no longer is. Sell me a song right now. Sell me 10 tracks right now off of that model, right? It doesn't work. So music is no longer the product. It's the soundtrack to this world you're building. That's why I want to encourage all artists to release their music in eras. Like there's no shortage of music. There's no shortage of music in this world, right? So there's no need to constantly try to flood, the industry with catalog that is just being made as music and not eras. Right? I like to live between my eras of music, because if I release a project now, then release a new project in 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, I'm still that same person from that previous month, unless something drastic has happened in my life. But it's about your evolution is based on your life being lived and you grow. You know, you don't have to force evolution, right? I never used to have this nose ring in the previous era or the era before that, but there's certain specific defining traits. You know, I shaved my beard earlier, towards the end of last year, right? I've had my beard since 2020, you know, and I was worried like, oh, what if it never comes back? No, here it is. I might cut it after this. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you approach your music career in eras, like productization comes so easy. If like capsules, era capsules, I've got 4 eras in my pocket right now. I've got my normal mixtape era back in 2014 when I moved to Durban. I've got my You're Absolutely Right era in 2016, around the time I also did colors. I'm still in Durban, but I'm growing, I'm learning. And then I've got my Spajonget era, which actually took over like 4 years, but that was just character development into each chapter. I'll talk you through some of those in a little bit. And then I've got the Chip is Stale era, which is my present day era with like where this t-shirt comes from. And it's meant to be stained in case anybody is wondering. I mean, you can't see it really, but I'll explain that concept as well. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that if you approach it in eras, you know, productization comes very easy. So if music is not the product, what is music doing, right? Just in the funnel analogy, music creates awareness. Music drives awareness. Awareness drives product. Product drives income, right? And I don't want to, you know, emphasize money too much on it's about money, because it's a sensitive issue with artists, you know, when you talk about, you know, money and how it was never really about money when you got into it, you know. But the thing about sustainability career wise, it does require you to be able to sustain your life. The new success, or what success, in fact, I wish this was like the most popular thing. What success is for an artist is sustainability, you know, and being able to continuously do this music thing, right? Because a lot of the things that hinder your ability to do music is when life gets in the way, because your artistry and your life are so separate, right? If you combine them, then they work within each other, right? You're now forced to think entrepreneurially, if that is a word. You're forced to think about how to productize. You know, you're forced to think about the multiple streams of income that help you sustain your life, because you sustaining your life means that you're able to sustain your music career because you're not dead. Because if you die, there's no album number 5 coming out. That will never happen if you're dead, you know? And I understand the easiest thing to do is to get a more stable stream of income, you know, like getting a day job, you know, and dedicating maybe the remaining 3 hours of the day or 4 hours of the day to your music. And sometimes not, because you're tired. You know, some of us are fighting through that. Some of guys, like, thing is, this art thing, this music thing gives you life. It gives life, you know, it's a thing of life. And if you were able to own it independently and to just own it, and then like your legacy, it's a dream, you know, it's a dream, you know. So from a music perspective, once your mindset shifts, you're no longer asking, how do I get more streams? You're asking, what can this body of work become? You know what I'm saying? Let's talk a little bit about IP, because that is what you're essentially productizing. Remember, productization is about turning these stories, these ideas, this IP, this brand, this identity into ownable assets, right? And I want to show you some of my IP that I've trial and errored with. So I already showed you the vinyl, which is out now, ByLwansta.com. There's a link in the description. And then I've got my CD. Someone asked me on Twitter, because like the catalog number for this is NORMVL. Someone's like, what's 01? And I was like, I'm leaving room for my debut album, which I released in 2022, Spajonget. You know, so I'm going to do it on CD. I just wanted to make sure that catalogically, it's number 1. So let's look at some of these products. So I showed you the t-shirt that I'm wearing, but it's, you know, makes more sense from the back. Do you have everything that you need? We productized the lyrics from The Chip is Stale, that project over there in the back with the red. This is from a song called Are You Pleased? because it's a human business. Kendrick said he's not in the music business, he's been in the human business. And, I'm a human being saying these words, and these are words that I mean. Do you have everything that you need? Are you pleased? So productizing my lyrics, right? And then we have this one that appears on the album cover, actually, on the Chippendale album cover. So this is an XLR that I took a photo of during our Your Weekly Touch-Up days at Barber Black Sheep. I just took a photo, and then I had it. And then this one says, someone's got to do it, right? When do I say that? Someone's got to do it. Oh, I say it on Good Company on the Chippendale, but productizing, and letting it appear on the album cover. This is like an opportunity for, people who love their album to have an opportunity to recreate it. Say you go to a Pantone Sunday, a red edition Pantone Sunday, and then you're wearing this t-shirt, and then like, boom, you've recreated the cover art. But these are moments that you're able to create as an extension of your IP, productization, And then now, the Spajonget era. This was one of the first t-shirts that I made while I was when I moved to Johannesburg. This is from Spajonget Chapter 2, because that album came out in 3 chapters. So this was the Chapter 2 era. Just moved to Joburg, found some good quality t-shirts. This is a t-shirt from Forward. I think it's about 200, between 200 and 250 GSM, which is good quality. With merchandise, specifically t-shirts, you want something that is able to have a longer lifespan. So I did these t-shirts, broke down the album cover, the African lilies. I were in my sister's nose on the album cover. It's a little faded now, but that thing at the bottom was her bottom lip, right? So I just took elements from the cover, brought in some typography, and kept our mascot, the African lily, aka the Agapanthus deno, and then we turned it into a t-shirt, right? And then this is one of my favorite ones, but also one of the creepiest ones according to a lot of people. This was from the Spajonget Chapter 1 era. This actually also appears on the album cover. Oh, wow. I actually have a pattern of having my merchandise appear on the covers. So there's the Chippendale one that I showed you with the XLR, and then there's this one from Spajonget Chapter 1, which was worn by Leah Jasmine on the cover art. And it was in that shoot for the cover art for Chapter 1 was a merchandise shoot. Essentially. And then Paige Furness, who was the photographer, took a beautiful photo of Leah Jasmine. And then I was like, yep, that's my EP cover for Chapter 1. Right. So just thinking in eras, thinking in, productization, these are just examples of how I've kind of used my intellectual property to turn it into tangible and ownable assets, that I can control. Because what's a priority for me is my independence, its ownership, and its legacy, right? Those 3 things: independence, ownership, and legacy, right? So with all these things comes control, controlling your business model, right? Otherwise, you're constantly going to be chasing gigs. You're going to be constantly chasing gatekeepers. You're going to be constantly dependent on platforms that you don't own. It's about ownership. And I mentioned gigs because even gigs themselves, events, your own events, are an example of productization. These are examples of a productization because you're taking your music, again, your IP, all of this is being built off of your IP. When we started Your Weekly Touch-Up, it was a ByLwansta residency, right? It was a ByLwansta residency where we used the ByLwansta brand, to grow this community, for however long we did it before we started introducing guests. But, that's an example of your IP. Now, Your Weekly Touch-Up is its own IP on its own. So you use IP to even grow other IP, right? So instead of thinking of productization as a side hustle, merch specifically, think about it as something that can contribute immensely to your revenue stream. Like a t-shirt. Oh, wait, there's another product that I forgot to speak to. It's this product. This is a book called Really Listening that I wrote in the beginning of 2020. In fact, I wrote it 10 years ago, but I started typing it out in the beginning of 2025. Really Listening, song lyrics that made me feel seen as a creative entrepreneur. I announced it prematurely last year. But there's no such thing, people knowing about it is good. It's just not out officially yet. Like I just trialed and error a little bit. I saw that maybe the cover currently isn't as durable as I'd like, so I've got a hardcover that Pulp Paperworks at 44 Stanley are working on right now. I'm gonna go check it out on the 8th. So this is just like a breakdown of my 10-year career, because I've done my 10 years now. I'm in my 12th actually in 2026. So I just spoke about the moments that have made me feel seen as a creative entrepreneur through lyrics, right? So you'll check it out when you do. But yeah, all these assets really extend the lifespan of my artist brand, but also more importantly, the music itself. I showed you the t-shirts and what they say and what they represent. It extends the lifespan of the music. And did you know that one sale of any of this product outperforms a whole digital streaming album's life cycle, at least in its first couple of years? And for a lot of people, the whole time, right? If I sell my vinyl, which is on sale for 650 Rand, I've outperformed, the streaming version already. If I sell t-shirts at whatever price, I've outperformed anything that's on my streaming pages already. Crazy, right? So if for you the end game is streaming and, putting out catalog, just like, spitting out catalog that is just, not being approached as errors, it's tricky. It's tricky, Lando, It's like you leave a lot of money on the table, Like, if you keep feeding the streets with music, we're seeing, oh, you're consistent. Oh, wow, your music making machine is incredible, And then, we find out that it's difficult to sustain. Not the music making, just the life. The life. That's why something that I've said to one of my business partners, MK, is that there's a certain kind of privilege you kind of have to be able to pursue a career in the arts. Because think about it, as a Black child, our parents have always like, you want to do something creative? No, get something stable. And that makes so much sense. Having read the creative culture and creative industries master plan, you kind of experience the rest of the world around you and your artistry. And you're like, whoa, okay, this makes sense. If creative careers aren't as stable as, the dream is, there's a big disconnect, right? So I think something I mentioned, I just spoke about it now, like stability is important in that, productization as an income stream really works and contributes towards stability, right? So instead of relying on one release, one tour, one sponsor, you build multiple streams of income, like through physical product, digital products, IP licensing, live experiences, brand collaborations, and even consulting and teaching, that are tied specifically to your practice. This is how you move from hustle into infrastructure and systems, because there's a big difference between the hustler and the business person, So I think that transition for a musician is very much based in just like understanding what you own from an IP perspective and how you can really take advantage of it, leverage it, and activate it really, So it's definitely more a mindset shift more than anything, this idea of productization, So artists who have this mentality say, cool, this is my audience, this is what I sell, and this is how my work shows up in the world, pointing at pointing at the fridge magnets that you made for people, and it makes you kind of like an easy person to work with from a brand perspective. Brands make it easier. Productization makes it easier for you to get sponsored, easier for you to be funded. If you're applying for mobility funds, you're able, when they ask about how are you planning on generating revenue, and you say, okay, cool, I've got product. It just makes you that much more easy to collaborate with because you have systems in place. You're thinking in catalogs, not singles, in systems, not moments, in sustainability and legacy, not virality, right? So if you productize, you own your own assets, you multiply your income per era and per release and per idea, and you build something that outlives the hype cycle. Yeah, productization is really the name of the game right now. Productization is the name of the game for me in 2026 as ByLwansta. I've got an EP that I released 10 years ago called You're Absolutely Right, which I'm really excited to kind of celebrate the capsule this year. Celebrating that capsule, bringing that back to life because I have the IP and it's mine. These are eras that I created, and now 10 years later, it's like, boom, there we go. This is something I did and something that will always exist. This will always be mine. This will always be in my control, because what's important to me is independence, ownership, and legacy. So yeah, productize. We productize this year. We've got to productize. We've got to make this thing make sense and not sense. And we've got to be able to sustain our lives and our careers. So yeah. Just a reminder, feel free to click on the link in the description that speaks to consulting with NORMVL. If you're looking to productize, to define an era for your release, if you're looking to, establish yourself as a business, artist, entrepreneur, feel free to consult us, fill out the form. We're taking in, a couple clients per month. Feel free to, contact us. Not everybody gets this slot, but, do reach out and we'll see just through your question, your answers, where you are in your career, and maybe we can even advise on maybe where you need to be before we speak, or maybe you're just primed and ready to speak to us at NORMVL. So yeah, connect with us. My name is ByLwansta and I create the things that I wish existed.